One of the best aspects to Blue Lock is all the rivalries we've got in this show. I mean, it is a running theme that the Blue Lockers are a bunch of assholes who are trying to be the best strikers. And so it is only natural that a lot of rivalries would arise from such an environment. In fact, I think Ego specifically wanted this. He wanted the rivalries to push the strikers further. He wanted them to create their own hell and wanted them to overcome it. That way he can produce the best of the best. And the result of all of this is rather impressive. We've got a lot of rivalries in the show, between the different players, but mainly between the main character and the remaining of the roster. I mean, for a guy like Isagi who shit talks every time he gets the chance, you already know he has a lot of rivals in this show. And as I said, I really love this because it is giving me the feeling between Goku and Vegeta every time. I mean, they are friends outside of football, but get them on the pitch and they are ready to kill if it meant they become number one. But ever wondered who is Isagi's biggest rival? Who is Isagi's arch nemesis? Or at least who will be Isagi's biggest rival at the end of Blue Lock? And so in today's video we are going to cover just that. First we are going to try and figure out who is a rival to Isagi Yoichi, and then we will try to guess who will be his main rival at the end of Blue Lock. And so without any further ado, I give you Blue Lock rivals. Alright, as I said, let's start by actually figuring out who is a rival to our main character, who actually qualifies to be called that, because not everyone who opposes Isagi or tries to be number one is necessarily a rival to him. And honestly, I have the perfect player to start with, which is none other than Karasu Tabito, who as of now is the one giving Isagi the hardest of times, opposing his thoughts and his decisions every time. However, and to be honest, I don't see Karasu as a rival, at least in terms of the sport or football. What is simply happening is they are butting heads because they are the smartest in the room. These two are the smartest player in Blue Lock, and so it is only natural that they are going to be very opinionated. Even other geniuses like Rin don't really care that much about what Isagi thinks, they only care about their craft. However, because Karasu is on the same level of thinking as Isagi, they are always bound to fight. However, and the reason Karasu is not a rival is actually due to the fact that he doesn't want to be the best striker anymore. Karasu is doing a perfect job being the beating heart of the team, while Isagi is the sword. And so there is no competition between the two for me to consider it to be a rivalry. And I feel like this applies to every other midfielder and defender, because even if they oppose Isagi, they are not really competing with him for them to be rivals. I mean, case in point, Nico Iki, who swore to bring down Isagi, however he then became a defender, and so even though he wants to bring Isagi down, it's not really a rivalry. And as I said, from this we can exclude almost every midfielder and defender, with the exception to few. And I feel like with these one, they still want to be strikers, even if they are not playing as one right now. And of course here I am talking specifically about the likes of Bachira, Chigiri and Reo. However, I'd rather leave them last because they are special cases. For now, let's talk about another very interesting midfielder, which is Sai Itoshi. Even though it would be very exciting to actually include him, I feel like he will never be Isagi's rival. I think with their playing styles they will be best buddies. Sai will feed Isagi passes and the latter will simply score. And so if anything, I feel like Sai would be another Hiyori to Isagi, another best buddy. However, Sai is not the only interesting midfielder for us to consider. There is of course Charles and Ness, and I feel like the case with Charles is the same as Karasu. He just butts heads with Isagi and is not really a true rival. Ness on the other hand is rather interesting. Even though he doesn't want to be the best striker, he is working on making Kaiser the best striker, and so he is kind of a rival, but for the sake of this video I'm not going to include him. However, if I excluded every midfielder and defender, would this mean that every striker we've seen in Blue Lock is a rival to Isagi? Well, not quite. You see, I feel like there are a lot of strikers like for example Agi or the majority of the pros who don't really care about Isagi. Sure, they might find him interesting like Snuffy did, but to them he's not really that interesting to their craft, and so they definitely disqualify for today's video. However, and among them there is an interesting striker, which is Bunny Iglesias. You see, even though right now he doesn't care about Isagi whatsoever, I don't even think he knows that he plays football. However, from their conversation and from the fact that they are going to play against him when Japan faces Spain, I feel like a rivalry might brew there. However, I am leaning towards it being actually a rivalry against Rin rather than Isagi, due to the involvement of Sai and whatnot. However, with that, we actually reach Ryo, Bachira, and Chigiri. And first, I am going to start with Ryo, whom I think he definitely began to become a rival to Isagi back in the second selection due to Nagi. However, as it stands, I don't think Ryo cares about anyone, and so he definitely disqualified to be a rival to Isagi. Chigiri and Bachira, however, even though they are playing as midfielders, they want to be the best strikers. And throughout Blue Lock, they've always shown their rivalry against Isagi. Even though they are the best of friends outside of the pitch, when it comes to football, they see Isagi as someone they need to beat. And so these two are going to be the first to be included. Next, and carry on with the Egoist 4, we have Kunigami Rensuke. And to be honest, back in the Manshine City game, I definitely saw him as a rival. However, ever since the Ubers game, he kinda fallen off from being a striker, and now he is better off in other positions. And so Kunigami will actually be excluded. And I feel like if I am talking about Kunigami, we gotta talk about Shido, whom I don't even care about anyone to have a rival. The only reason he had Rin as his rival is because Rin looked down on everyone. That really pissed Shido off. However, when it comes to Isagi or Baro or Nagi, most of them are just competitive, and so Shido doesn't hold any grudges against them, and he only cares about the explosions he can reach when playing with them. And so Shido again is disqualified. And in the same boat, I think Otoya as well should be disqualified here, simply because he never really cared about Isagi. Even if his best friend Karasu was doing everything to break Isagi, Otoya simply did not care. And I feel like that's due to his mentality. He doesn't care enough about people for him to actually have any rivals. Now, since I spoke about Karasu, Otoya, and Shido, I feel like it is only fitting for me to talk about Yukimiya Kenyu. Now, Yuki is definitely a rival to Isagi. He actually considers himself to be one. Whether Isagi considers him, that actually is up to debate. I mean, for the very least, he was at the beginning of the Ubers game. And actually, now thinking about it, I feel like at the end of the PXG game, he definitely shown promising seeds to be Isagi's rival, and so I will be including him. From there, I have few obvious ones, starting up straight with Baro, Rin, and Nagi. Now, Baro and Rin definitely want to kill Isagi so they become number one, and so I feel like it is pretty obvious that they are his rivals. As for Nagi, before it wasn't really that clear. I mean, sure, he wanted to beat Isagi, but I feel like it was a momentary rivalry more than anything. However, after making his deal with Boratsuta, there is no way he is not going to be considered as a rival, simply because right now he wants to crush everything there is Blue Lock, and the one representing Blue Lock is without a doubt Isagi, and so his rivalry with Isagi would get reignited again, and this time it's going to be a full-fledged rivalry and not really a momentary one. However, and speaking of the Boratsuta 3, I think there is another rival in there, which is of course Kira Ryusuke. And for this one, I feel like I don't even need to explain it, because Kira will be coming for blood. Isagi and Bachira's blood specifically, which makes him actually one of the most interesting rivals to Isagi as of yet. However, and moving on, next we have probably the most obvious one, which is Michael Kaiser. I mean, the guy was Isagi's biggest rival for the biggest arc in Blue Lock. In fact, the Neo Egoist League was half of what we've got in Blue Lock, and so the guy who was the true rival for half the series is definitely on the list. But finally, let's actually talk about the pros. Now, I've already disqualified some of them, for example Levi and Snuffy, because even though they've seen Isagi, they did not really care that much about him. And I feel like this goes for the World 5 as well. Luna was only interested in Ren, and then Blake, Cavazos, and Silva did not even acknowledge any of the Blue Lockers, and so they are definitely not on this list. Loki, on the other hand, he is definitely going to be on this list, because not only did Isagi get his blood boiling, but also they will be facing Japan twice in this World Cups, and so it is only natural that he is one of the main rivals for Isagi. Next, I think Chris Prince can without a doubt be considered as a rival, simply because right now he wants to be the best in the world, and at the same time he wants to crush Isagi Yoichi. And so when Isagi reaches the pros level, I feel like Prince will meet him there for sure. And finally, let's talk about Noah. Now, to be honest, right now, Noah doesn't care about Isagi. However, from his challenge, if Isagi levels up enough, Noah will definitely consider him as a rival, simply because it is in his nature to crush the likes of Isagi in order to make himself stronger. And obviously, with Isagi wanting to dethrone him at the end of this series, Noah will definitely be one of the main rivals for RMC. However, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we figured out every rival Isagi has. Alright, now with all of Isagi's rivals put in one list, it's time for us to actually figure out who will be his main rival at the end of the series. Now, I have three categories in mind. The first one is the sole rival, or maybe one or two, the ones that actually are on Isagi's level at the end of the series. Or for the very least, even if they are not on his level, at least they are trying to reach him with everything they've got. Then we have the category of actually having a rivalry with Isagi at the end of the show. It's not the strongest rivalry, but a competition is still brewing between them. And finally, and the third category is actually the rivalries that dies out. These ones I feel like with Isagi's insane rate of evolvement will not hold in the future, and Isagi might not consider them to be rivals anymore. In fact, we are going to start with the third category straight up. And here, and I think it is pretty obvious, I am going to start with Yukimiya Kenyu. I think Yuki might still be a rival for a few games, however I honestly don't see him evolving to the point of actually being a rival to Isagi at the end of the show. And in the same vein, I have Chigiri Hyoma right here. I feel like the writer doesn't care about him that much. I am sorry for Chigiri fans, but it's not honestly my fault, the writer just doesn't care about Chigiri that much, and he might even drop being a striker for being a wing. And also there is the whole aspect to him actually injuring his knee and giving out on football, so I don't think we will see him at the end of the show. Next, moving on to the category that I think will have rivalries against Isagi, but it's not going to be the strongest. And here I have few players, the first of which is Chris Prince. I think the guy's true rivalry would be with Noah. By the time Isagi becomes pro, I feel like Prince might be too old for him to actually compete with Prime Isagi. In the same category as well, I feel like Bachira will be fitting to be here. To be honest, his rivalry with Isagi never was strong to begin with. I mean, they are competing to be the best striker, but Bachira is kinda like Shido if you think about it. He has his own rules to being the best, and so he might not compete with Isagi that much. I still think when they meet on the pitch they will have sparkles, however it's not going to be the strongest of rivalries. Next, and in the same category, I actually have Kira Ryusuke, whom I think will play a huge role in the U20 World Cups, however beyond that I definitely don't see him competing with Isagi. I feel like he will shine and die in this arc. I mean, I still would think he would go pro and he would still hold grudges against Isagi and he will still be his rival, but it's not going to be that strong. What I think is going to be that strong is the following players actually. Starting up straight with Loki. I mean, Isagi basically insulted him, however after the game he did not think much of it. And I feel like that's because Loki is too focused on Noah, who much like Prince will be his main rivalry. However, because Loki is young, I feel like he will build a strong rivalry with Isagi once he reaches his level. And for that reason I am placing him in category 1, even though I think he will have the weakest rivalry in this category. Next, I am actually going to throw a curveball and say Nage Seishiro. You see, Nagi is just crazy like that, and with him trying to destroy Blue Lock and whatnot, I feel like he will definitely make it to this point where he is competing with Isagi at the highest of level, and he is giving Isagi a run for his money. However, due to his laid-back personality, I really can't see him any higher than this. But next, in the realm of those who are really clawing at Isagi even at the end of the series, we have the German Emperor Michael Kaiser. Now, as I said, being the main rival of Isagi for the longest arc in Blue Lock definitely tells you everything about Kaiser and how important he is for Isagi's evolution. And so for that reason, I definitely see him as one of those who would remain rivals to Isagi until the end. And I only think he is beaten by the remaining 3 players because I feel like his arc was almost complete in the Neo Egoist League. And for that reason, I can't really place him any higher. However, and moving up, for the runner-up of being Isagi's biggest rival, we have his idol Noah. Now, I have no doubt that Isagi will be facing Noah at the end of the show. It is just leading towards that. And the rumors of the show just ending in the U20 World Cups just doesn't make any sense, specifically due to the involvement of Noah. A little bit of Prince and Snuffy, but mainly due to the pact that Isagi and Noah has. And for that reason, I definitely see him at the finish line, right there in front of Isagi. And I know what you might think, Noah is old, and so by the time Isagi reaches that level, he might not be in his prime for him to actually compete against Isagi. However, the fact that both play for the same club, I think they will have a stronger rivalry than for example Prince or Loki. But in fact, this reason specifically is why Noah will not be the main rival for Isagi, and I feel like it is going to be between 2 players, Rin motherfreaking Itoshi and Baru Shoei. Now for Rin, it's honestly pretty obvious. He was the main boss to beat ever since the second selection. And at the end of the U20 game, Rin also considers Isagi his rival. And then there is also the fact that Isagi was chosen and might be chosen again by Sai, which will push Rin to actually seek Isagi's blood. In football, that is. And so from that, I think Rin is pretty obvious. The other choice, however, is rather curious, because even though Baroshoy is one of Isagi's strongest rivals, in fact, right now he is the third most important rival right after Kaiser and Ren. However, there is one reason for why I am placing Baro here, and that's actually due to the duality between Baro and Isagi, which resembles the duality between Snuffy and Noah. And I know there isn't really much of a rivalry here, but that's all due to Snuffy's weak mentality. Isagi, on the other hand, is ruthless, and so I definitely see him and Baro being the last rivals in Blue Lock, even beating Rin slightly. And I know Rin has a strong case as well, and so I am putting them in the same category. These two will be the final rivals for Isagi. However, that's the video for you guys. What do you think about this idea, and who do you think will be the last rival for Isagi? Please let me know in the comment. But with that, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.